Oh,
Hey,
long
what's up,
time no
Doc?
see.
How you been, man?
I've been all right, but of course, some of the same things that were haunting me
No.
before are still around. I have yet to exercise those demons.
Oh,
Well, how have you been? I see the things you do, and I catch as many as I can. So I'm impressed by your, prolific output. It's pretty good.
yeah. It's being a podcaster is kind of like being a professor. It's publish, 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 publish.
Yeah, yeah. And I just you saying that, I'm exhausted. I can't. There's no way I could possibly pull that off, man. I can't do a podcast. People are like, you should do a podcast. I'm like, no, there's only one of me. So I'm impressed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Peterson. Not that you want to follow in his footsteps necessarily, but he just started recording his classes
Oh,
to begin with. That's what he said. How he started.
well, isn't that something?
Yeah. Maybe think about
Okay.
doing that because people need to know rhetoric because we're
Yeah.
immersed in it.
Apparently, well, they people don't realize that, and it's hard to convince rhetoricians of that these days. Which is kind of what I want to talk about.
Wait, do these rhetoricians, do they have some sort of complex where they don't think they're important enough, or that they're doing something useless?
Oh, no, 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 no. They don't think rhetoric's important. See, the key is social justice, my friend.
Oh,
Rhetoric, I mean, who cares about that stuff?
so a hierarchy of needs has been affected, where society is more important than how society communicates.
Yes. Yes, that is true. But I think we can kind of do both. I think how society communicates, is caring about society. But that's just me.
Well, yeah, could you describe the mindset that switches the priority of, let's just say, specifically teaching and studying rhetoric? And people are going to say rhetoric. They're going to get mad at me
Yeah.
no matter how I pronounce it. So I pronounce it funny. I know I do. But and a lot of businesses and domains of study have put social justice, whatever that is, ahead of actually teaching the skill that they.
Right.
So why does that turn occur? Why would somebody think that their wealth of knowledge needs to be put behind their ideology or whatever it is that they're doing that is about social justice, that is kind of taking over your community or the community of scholars that you're interacting with?
Well, they're taking a stance on rhetoric that isn't really rhetoric, right? I mean, it's expression, and it's the expression of one viewpoint, and any other viewpoint is the enemy of social justice. So they're just about that one viewpoint. Now, here's the thing about rhetoric: if there's only one viewpoint, you don't need rhetoric. The whole point of rhetoric is to hold forth in a democratic context, right, with various different ways of looking at things, and you talk about those things, and you test those things on other people, and you figure out the best way to persuade people about those things, and you deliberate. Deliberation is dead, because deliberation means that you're opening up the possibility that our social justice goals are wrong, right? As long as that possibility is opened up, it's dangerous. We can't deal with that, right? So we have to get rid of that. When it comes to social justice, there's one way of going about it. It's our way, and that's that.
Okay. But even within the domain of social justice, is there not deliberation on how to communicate social justice? And is there not some sort of, I mean, they're redefining words left and right, so they are changing languages, and there's got to be some sort of deliberation process in that. So are we pretending that rhetoric doesn't exist anymore so that we can just impose some sort of will that is not checked by accountability and consent?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They are, well aware of how we use language to build ideologies and narratives and things like that. So they're using language to build their ideology and their narrative. And they're also using language to demonize anything that does not fit in to that narrative and ideology. right? So I guess in that sense, they're being rhetorical. But rhetoric as the study of effective communication, the teaching of the ability to go from one context to another and still communicate effectively from one context to another, all the things that I teach, all the things that I got into rhetoric to do, the study of rhetorical theory throughout the history of human thought, those things, push them aside. No, we're not doing that anymore.
So there's no pretense of neutrality, and probably they'd say that neutrality itself was a pretense all along, maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly what they would say.
Okay.
That's exactly what they would say.
So
Yeah. Neutrality is a tool for maintaining the status quo.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the problem with that then is that it becomes, again, this is the postmodern critical theory dilemma, when everything becomes about power and assertion, then there is inherent blind spots that crop up. When you see everybody that questions or needs persuasion as the enemy, you're losing out on all of those other points of view. So you become very not immune to criticism. You may feel immune to criticism, but you are actually no longer participating in that Millsian, he who doesn't know how to defend his position or doesn't know the opposite position, doesn't know his own position.
Yes.
So they're breaking themselves off from communication, therefore becoming crystallized in some way and weak to hacking.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And this is why open inquiry, critical inquiry is demonized, because you're questioning their position, and they can't have that. If they're going to entertain those questions, they're weakening their stance as far as they're concerned, right? You have to just push those questions away. We're done talking about this stuff. That's the idea about the social justice turn in rhetoric. It's not a turn, it's a transformation, it's a takeover. But yeah, the idea is we've already discussed this. The conversation's over. We're moving on. So if you say, wait a minute, well, what about this, that, and the other thing? You're part of the problem. You're a shill for white supremacy or whatever, right? And you got to go.
Okay. Where does that leave you then?
Where does it leave me? Well, persona non grata for sure.
Okay.
I'm not on the margins. I'm just, I don't consider myself a member of this field anymore. I am a rhetorician, but I'm not a member of this field. I'm like a Ronin samurai. I have no lord, but I can still fight, right? I still got the skills. I still believe in it. The whole Bushido thing, I love it, right? That's how I feel right now. And that also is, relevant to this whole thing, because they often, the last few moments of the past week and a half, they often say, what you're doing isn't a good look, and I'm like, for whom? For you guys? Yeah, I stopped caring about you guys like 3 years ago. The best thing to do now is to expose you, right? I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And if I do talk to you, it's really for the eavesdroppers and the people listening. I'm not trying to convince you.
Okay.
You're done, right?
That is actually a very good rhetorical awareness or tact to take, especially like if you're battling with somebody on Twitter or on the internet.
Right.
It's not about winning them over. It's about performing to the audience. This is
right.
You understand that you are on a stage.
Right. It's the same concept as the open letter, right? I may be writing to one person, but I'm really writing to everybody.
Yeah.
Right. That one person is just the what's the term I'm looking for? Well, the fancy term is the kairotic moment, but I don't want to do that. The other person is just the opportune occasion, right?
Okay.
For me to express my views.
Okay. So, what are your views, Eric Smith?
Well, I want to be clear about two things, right? I want to save rhetoric from wokeness. And when I say that, I mean the field of rhetoric from wokeness. Rhetoric is, to me and to most rhetoricians, right, a list of things. One is the study and teaching of effective communication, argument, right? Not argument in the colloquial sense, but argument in the, I'm going to put together this formatted speech or whatever that will best convince you, right? And that depends on context and things like that. The second thing is the study of narrative, ideology, civic rhetoric, how belief systems are created and maintained, right? And I mean, if I'm going to have anything in common with a bunch of the social justice scholars and activists in my field, it's kind of that. They are also, interested in how these things are created, but they have their there are only certain answers that are okay. And one of those answers is, well, hegemony is white supremacy, period. And we have to fight it. That's why when they say critical is really a synonym for counter-hegemonic, right?
Oh, okay.
When we say critical, we're thinking critical thinking. We're analytical, right? We're doing our best to avoid using logical fallacies and being duped by logical fallacies. That's critical thinking. To them, it's okay. How can we demonize or go against the powers that be? Period.
And logical fallacies, if they need to be entertained, or inconsistencies of logic, or hypocrisy, that is all par for the course, as long as we're getting our way. We're advancing this cause. Okay.
Right.
So does that make them immune to argument based on fallacies, or calling out their fallacies? Is that all a useful tact?
Well, they like to think they're immune. And I can show, if they were truly immune, they wouldn't react to me the way they do. I'll say something, completely innocuous, right? At the very least, it may be, a contentious point, but I say it civilly. And their angry responses tell me that they're not quite as immune as they think they are, right? Hence, instead of engaging me, they need to get rid of me. They need to silence me, right? And that's the tactic they're trying to use right now. So.
Are you willing to say how somebody would silence you? Is this they're coming after your career, or denying you publication? They're denying you a forum?
Denying me a forum, for sure. Ultimately, they're just trying to paint me as this crazy person who, doesn't get it, right? I'm this crazy person who doesn't get it. I'm a troll, not because I'm trolling people, but because I'm not obsequious, right? I'm not going to say, oh, you're right and I'm wrong. I'm going to say, well, part of that explanation doesn't make sense. I need some more elaboration. That's trolling to them, right? Okay. So I can't do that. So basically, I'm a demonized figure. I'm the villain, right? And the only reason I'm the villain is because I'm not bowing down to this woke culture.
So we both know about Evergreen. You actually taught my documentary, exposed your students to the documentary. And one thing that's very evidenced in the documentary is that the students are behaving that way. And a couple steps later, you see that the faculty are also working that way. So it's not excusable, but it's not unheard of that 20-year-olds would censure and participate in, we're just going to cut you out of the friend group. It seems like kind of a developmentally appropriate way of dealing, or at least learning how group dynamics work. You're speaking about professors. These people are installed. They had to, at least at one point, argue their dissertation. At some point, they had to convince somebody of something, and they're reverting to these tactics.
Yeah.
I don't want to pretend that I am shocked, because I'm not, because this is how things are going, but still. It's shocking.
Well, I have two responses to that. The first is I'm going to reference a rhetorician, the late Wayne Booth, who wrote extensively about rhetoric. And one of his later books was called The Rhetoric of Rhetoric, right? So that's a great way to end your career, just very meta. The analysis of analysis, or something like that. And
so he wasn't analyzing the rhetorical community, or the process of teaching rhetoric. He was talking about the actual study of it, not the people. Okay.
Right. Yeah, the study and the use of rhetoric and things like that. He had kind of a hierarchy of rhetorical interaction. There's like the win rhetoric, where you just want to beat the other person, right? There's the bargain rhetoric, in which you're looking for compromise. You're not even trying to even win. You're just you are fine with compromising and things like that. And then there's the ideal, which he called listening rhetoric or rhetorology. And he describes, may I read a quote to you? Yes, because he's always here. Listening rhetoric is exemplified by this statement. I am not just seeking a truce, I want to pursue the truth behind our differences. I have reason to hope that my opponent here will respond to my invitation for both of us to engage in genuine listening. So this is when two people are saying, okay, I'm going to do my best to understand what you are saying and why you are saying it. It's not just empathy, it's cognitive empathy. I want to know why you think what you think so I can better understand you and therefore better understand how I can talk to you, right? So that's the ideal, but there are stages of listening rhetoric. That's listening rhetoric A. Yes. Listening rhetoric B is, this person has no interest in really listening to me, but I'm going to really listen to him anyway so that I can figure out a way to be as persuasive as possible and hopefully get him to do the same thing. Then there's listening rhetoric C. I'll read to you listening rhetoric C.
Oh no, is this the toxic listening culture?
Yes. I know that only by listening closely to my opponent can I hope to outsmart her and thus gain what I want no matter what it costs her. The Evergreen students looked at Weinstein and said, listening rhetoric C. He wants to talk, but he really wants to trick us. He really wants to maintain his power and things like that, right? It's not, a term I hear often is rhetorical gymnastics. You know, he's going to try to use his words to twist things around and confuse us and trick us and things like that. If you go against the narrative, you are automatically put in listening rhetoric C. No matter how sincere you are, no matter how civil you are, it's all a trick. And the professors, not the students, well, some graduate students, yes, but the professors in my field are doing that. If you are against this narrative, if you so much as question the efficacy of what we're doing, then you are not sincere. You are listening to rhetoric C. You're trying to figure out a way to maintain your power.
And outsmart them.
Yes.
But they're forcing you to act that way then.
Well, I'm not even, well, they're forcing me. Here's what they're forcing me to do. They're forcing me to go scorched earth.
Yeah.
That's what they're forcing me to do. They're forcing me to say, I'm done with you guys. What I'm going to do is expose your nonsense to everybody and show them that rhetoric, rhetorical theory, the study of rhetoric, the field, is a case study for the detriments of wokeness. That's what they're forcing me to do.
Yeah, so you get into a position such as myself, and I'm thinking a lot about James Lindsay, who has analyzed critical theory very deeply and probably, I think it's fair to say, participates in C. Like, let's see it so we can outsmart it and then either demolish it or erect something in its place, which is an open question that he tends to leave open, except for the demolishing part. He's scorched earth too. So once you get into that mindset, then what are the first steps to take to expose them, as you say? What is to be exposed?
I'm publishing an essay in the next couple of weeks called Ridicule Ridiculous Ideas, right? And it's an argument for saying, at this point where you know they're not listening and they will go after anybody who is against what they're talking about, regardless of how civil they're being or something like that, or how sincere they are, or even if they want the same things but different methodologies, right? The best you can do is expose them and ridicule them. Now, what I'm saying about ridicule is not degradation. Those are two different things. You can see people being mobbed on the internet. That's degradation, all right? We don't have the pillory. We don't have tarring and feathering anymore. We have being mobbed on social media, right? The difference between ridicule and degradation is that ridicule allows the person being ridiculed to respond back, right? It's still a conversation. Socrates talked about this. In the Gorgias, he's talking to Callicles, and he says, "Listen, if you think I'm saying something nonsensical, then say that. Call me adult," he says. "Call me adult. I don't care as long as we can have this conversation," right? So the ridicule goes back and forth. Degradation is when only you're allowed to ridicule, and that person doesn't get a say, right? That's what's happening in my field. I don't support that. I support ridicule. If something is absurd, point out why it's absurd, right? Don't just say it's absurd and walk away. Say, here's why it's absurd. Your turn.
Okay,
Right?
so which is totally different than what we think of as ridicule. It's
Yes.
exposing ridiculousness with some sort of justification.
Yes.
Maybe
This is clear in the essay.
Okay, so maybe you do the barb. Yeah, maybe you don't even do a barb, but maybe there's a barb first, but there's always a reel that reels in. There's something that's actually behind the ridicule that you can actually engage in expositing.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. And you hit the nail on the head when you said it doesn't have to be a barb. It can be anything. I was doing my best to expose. I mean, I did expose some of their absurdities, but their tendency to look at a innocuous statement as an insult and respond to it via ridicule is something they do often. I was trying to record that, and get it out there, but I wasn't able to. They, I guess some of them realized what I was trying to do. I don't know.
Okay. So, but it is one of the tactics to degrade
Right.
degradate a statement that they posit as problematic to
Yes.
their worldview. But
Yes.
it might be the case that they are actually seeing something that's troublesome to their worldview in this so-called innocuous statement. Maybe it's not an innocuous statement. Maybe there's something in it that they're troubled by.
Sure, let's talk.
And then we can ask why. Yeah.
Right.
So why would they be troubled by it?
There's the thing is you can't ask them.
Oh.
No, you can't ask them.
Okay.
Asking them is not letting it go. Like, I'm harassing you if I ask you a follow-up question.
Okay.
I'm not kidding. This is how they react, and they will tell you this.
Okay.
You'll ask a follow-up question, and they'll be like, "Stop harassing her," or "Stop harassing him," or something like that. When really you're having a conversation, and you're asking why that quote-unquote innocuous statement was actually problematic.
Yeah. It was a phenomenon. Again, Evergreen happened. I researched that, tried to figure out what was going on, and then it happens over and over and over again where this mobbing or this, a woke crusade occurs and somebody's pilloried. And again, it's happened so many times, and I've looked at it so many times, that one thing that I ended up seeing or deciding what was going on was that they're trying to end conversation, but that would mean that they're ending their own career as an activist. So they have to keep the conversation going by regurgitating the same thing over and over and over again. I'm talking about very low-grade activists on like Clubhouse or on Twitter.
Sure.
But it sounds like there's something similar where they want to end the conversation in this domain. They want the conversation over, or they want to be able to control the conversation, but then there's no more conversation, and therefore what do they have to do anymore if they end the conversation?
They have to perpetuate and hold up the narrative and do whatever it takes to do that, whether it's nonsensical or not. They have to abide by what's called social reality as opposed to empirical truth, right? Social reality is what sounds right based on the things we've heard in our lives, how our mindset's been socially constructed to see certain things and not other things, right? So a social reality is that, when you ask, you do a poll and you ask people, how many black men are killed by police yearly, unarmed black men, right? They'll say the thousands and things like that. It's nowhere near that, right? But the social reality is, via the media, social media, the history of this country, things like that, they all come together and say, well, it's got to be in the thousands. And anybody who says otherwise, even if they show me data, right, those people are the problem.
So their job is to uphold the narrative by then this group of highly trained rhetorical people. Their job then is to kind of repurpose all of reality to a narrative. So they're basically just using all of their tricks to show how this is this and this is this and this in order to construct and maintain or change social reality.
Yes.
Okay. And that work could be endless. You can find problems anywhere. You know, like Barth, wasn't him? He did mythologies where he just did a bunch of little tiny essays about the weirdest things
Yes, he did.
to show all the meaning there. So that is their product then. They're creating knowledge by repurposing everything into their narrative, kind of like a Borgian kind of thing.
Yes.
And so they
like
have
that.
infinite work. They can't ever, there's no end to it, but there is an end to it if the game is called, or if they're ridiculed, if they're called their bluff. And
Well, what the ridicule does is show to people who are on the fence or confused by what's going on that, they're not crazy. There's somebody out there who's saying, okay, this is absurd as you think it is. You're not nuts. You're not missing anything, right? They are being nonsensical, and many of them know damn well they're being nonsensical. That's not the point. The point is the narrative.
Okay.
And to perpetuate this. And it is like a blob, right? It's trying to take in anything it can and spin it into something that supports this narrative. A lot of that's going on with SEL, social emotional learning, right? That wasn't always a bad thing, but the woke among us took it and spun it into, social emotional learning insofar as it supports our social justice goals, right? Okay. Now it's something different, but we're still calling it SEL.
Okay. Yeah. So at one point in history, education was considered to be reading, writing, and arithmetic, or rhetoric was in there. Rhetoric was a main part of our education for centuries, actually.
Yes.
And now it sounds obscure to people. It might even be obscure to people, even though we're immersed in it constantly. And a lot of the postmodern reality is basically sees everything as rhetoric. But I would like you to state how this actually affects the world. This is not just an academic study, or insofar as it is an academic study, it's training people that go out in the world and do things to the world. So what is what is the school to job market pipeline?
One of the things I'm supposed to do as a professor of rhetoric is help students to the best of their ability, and this is Aristotle, discern the available means of persuasion in any given situation, right? So you go from one context to another. You know that in this context, you are constrained in certain ways. You can use certain metaphors and references, not others. If you truly want to be persuasive and get them to listen to you and take you seriously. You go to another situation, totally different set of metaphors and references you need to use, and certain ones you cannot, right? This adaptability is key. And this communicative adaptability from one situation to another is key. What's also key is looking at that context as with the freshest eyes possible, right? You're not projecting the last context onto this new context, right? You're not bringing your own baggage to the situation. You're doing your best to be as present as possible, and you're looking at your audience, whether it be one person or several people, and you're acting accordingly, right? This is called kairos in the field, which is a confluence of time, place, subject matter, people involved, and things like that. That's what needs to happen, and that's what's not happening. We can't communicate across communities because we're doing that. We already know who they are before we meet them, right? We've already projected what they're going to say before we meet them. We're mind readers, right? And that's the problem. We have to get rid of that. We have to transcend that and do our best to be as present in the moment as possible. And that's my job. Part of it anyway is to get students to recognize that, and to the best of my ability, help them overcome those situations.
And others in your field are teaching students, ostensibly maybe, this is what they end up doing, teaching students to read into the world rather than to read the world.
Right.
Very Marxian. The job is not to understand, it's to change.
Right.
Yeah.
And you do already know who those people are, especially if they have certain skin color. or a certain socioeconomic status or what have you. You do know who they are. Don't listen to them. You don't have to. You bulldoze them.
Okay.
That's what you do.
And somehow that works. If enough people do it, then they win, right? Like 2020. If enough students chant the same thing over and over again in every single classroom, then social reality is changed.
Well, they win if people are too afraid to talk back to the situation. People have precarious job positions, right? They don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to get canceled, right? So they do a cost-benefit analysis, and they say, you know what, I'm just going to back off and let this happen. And that backing off and letting it happen is why my field is the way it is right now. Hence my gadflyness, and hence my purposeful irritation. I have no choice anymore, right? This is what I have to do. I'm the only person in the field doing this, so I have to be loud. And I have to speak often, right? And I have to push back because nobody else is, for good reason. I understand why they're not. And there are some people who I don't understand why they're not. Okay, if you're a full professor and you're 5 years away from retirement, come on, speak up. Will you, help me out here. But they're not. So I have to do what I have to do, and that involves, as I said earlier, scorching the earth.
Oh, okay. Okay. So how do you be an effective gadfly? All else being equal, even if somebody's on the wrong side of history or somebody's unjust in their gadflyness, what are the basic rules of this artful irritation?
Well, again, you're not trying to convince that person anymore. That person is an excuse for you to say your thing so that the other people listening in can hear another viewpoint. And perhaps hear their own confusion validated, and they can know that they're not crazy, they're not missing something. This is indeed nonsensical.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's where I am right now. I'm not, I'm done trying to convince them or have an authentic conversation with them. That's those days are over.
They've proved beyond reasonable doubt that they are not interested in reasonable.
Beyond reasonable doubt. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
yes.
You said, so you broaden the sphere of the conversation by doing an act of exposition, like I did with Evergreen. Like, okay, here's a bunch of stuff. Yeah, everybody sees it, but I'm going to expose the whole thing. So I'm going to project onto the widest possible audience everything, so far as I could do, so far as I could show, onto a bigger map. So it's no longer this college in the woods. This is America now. Everybody can see this, and then it perpetuated beyond that. So there's the changing of the attention sphere, and then there's also this act of ridicule. So that's the participation. That's kind of the act that you're doing by calling a spade, let's say, and then saying how it's a spade,
right? So
that you can actually build a greater argument. What's the other thing? Then there's got to be another step.
Well, okay. So you talked about exposing, right? Yeah. And you talked about ridicule. Right. Yeah. The other step is to do those things as often as possible.
Okay.
Empirical evidence, right, is a good thing to have. And I was trying to do that the other day because I disagreed with a woman of color. She, put it out there to a Facebook forum called the Council of Writing Program Administrators, which is actually an organization in my field. Saying
they sound so prestigious, but it's just a freaking Facebook group. Sorry.
Well, no, it's not. I'm sorry. I misexplained that. They're not a Facebook group. They are an actual organization who has a Facebook group, right? Yeah. And she put it out there that I was attacking her because she is a woman of color, right? I disagree with her. And we could talk about what I disagree with and things like that if you want later on. But I disagree with her, so she put that out there. So I said two things. I said, okay, I have to say that that's not true and point to proof that it's not true. I have to do that. But what I also have to do is make sure I record their responses to that explanation, right? So I tried to do that. I put, something on the Facebook page saying there are people saying things about me, and people are spreading those false rumors. So I'm going to set the record straight here, and I do that in like 3 or 4 paragraphs. And then I sat back and I was like, okay, when they respond with their degradation, I'm going to take as many screenshots as possible and have that record. Unfortunately, the administrators of the page turned off commenting.
On just you or her as well?
On just me initially, I think, and then eventually everybody.
Yeah.
And then they shut down the page.
Yeah.
So my strategy didn't work.
No.
Yeah. I heard of some commotion on Twitter and things like that, but that's not really what I was looking for.
Okay.
But I mean, I say all this to say that my strategy would have been to, show people, talk about it. And then when they say, oh, that didn't happen, I can be like, oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, let me show you this, and the other thing.
Yeah, you're a man in search of receipts.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is how they respond to a civil bit of self-defense. And let's be clear about this. She accused me of doing that on the eve of a woman of color being put on the Supreme Court, and the eve of Anita Hill being the keynote speaker at the field's largest conference next week. Okay. Right? So these are things, people have lost their careers for less. That was a really awful thing she did. Okay. And, when I tried to defend myself, I wanted to A, set the record straight, and B, show how these people really are, because I knew they were going to respond in awful ways, but commenting was turned off.
Okay. The tactic of reputation destroying then is the counter to the gadfly. If you can say that the gadfly is full of shit, that's all he does. He hangs out on the frickin' poop pile, and then he buzzes it around our head, right? So that's one way to deal with the gadfly. The gadfly has to have a counter to that, and I guess what you were saying is be reasonable, be explicit and civil, and just kind of state your case and let the chips fall? Or how do you counter reputation slander? I guess you already answered this, but maybe even like before you begin to counter it, how do you read the room, right? How do you prepare yourself to do it in the proper way? Because you could do it the wrong way.
Yeah, sure. All this started because 3 years ago, I did not read the room. I thought I was reading the room. I made assumptions that apparently I shouldn't have made. Fast forward to now, and, my faith in having a real conversation with these people is now gone. So their degradation of me doesn't really matter anymore. My sphere has widened. Yeah. It's beyond the field right now. As I think I said earlier, people were insisting that I quote unquote let it go, or why can't you just let this go? Meanwhile, they didn't say that to anybody else. Okay. It's me being civil, and other people
just let it happen. Just let it happen.
Yeah, just let it happen. Right. And notice only the people who oppose me were saying that. Right. Let it go. Translation. Stop reminding us that we make no sense, and stop showing other people that we make no sense. That's what they really meant. Okay. But one person said, why can't you just let it go? This isn't a good look. And I didn't really respond thoroughly to her, but I said to myself, a good look to whom? Yeah. To whom? Yeah. You guys? So what you're saying is, if you don't stop doing this, people who already hate you are going to hate you. Right?
Yeah, or people that don't know about us are going to start hating us. Maybe it's a bad look.
Right.
It's a stain on the field.
The last thing I'm going to do is let it go. Okay. I'm going to embrace this until I give myself carpal tunnel. All
Oh,
right.
okay.
Yes, this is the last thing I'm going to do is let it go. I don't care if it's a bad look to the field. The field is a mess right now, and I'm trying to clean it up.
It's lost its way.
Yes, very much so.
You said 3 years ago you made some assumptions
Yes.
about the room. What were these assumptions?
I was assuming that I was talking to a room full of scholars in the field of rhetoric. I was talking to, as I like to say, middle school mean girls. That's really who I was talking to. And I didn't realize exactly how much vitriol I would attract until I attracted it. So that's how I misread the room. But I mean, it's a good thing. I'm glad that happened to me because it set a lot of things in motion, right? Publishing all these things, whether they're op-ed articles or books, I want to get it out there as much as possible, that really drove home what needs to happen for this field to be saved. And what needs to happen is somebody, being the bad guy, quote unquote. And that appears to be me. And it is what it is.
You've also started or support other organizations in a variety of vectors. So your skill and knowledge of rhetoric is actually being used in, for lack of a better term, anti-woke and kind of highbrow anti-woke spaces. Your book, can you give me the name? It's an academic title.
A critique of anti-racism and rhetoric and composition. There's a new book.
Oh.
Hold on one second.
Publish.
This is, can you see that? Is it backwards?
The Lure of Disempowerment. Yes. Reclaiming Agency in the Age of CRT. There we go again. Like your critique is expanding well beyond your field.
Yes.
Because, and I think that actually shows how powerful potentially the tools in your field are for changing and developing new ways of discourse, changing course.
I agree. And it has to be outside of the field because my field has become aphoristic, which is to say that there seems to be no way out. There's no talking won't work. Doing my best to present these ideas, to create some kind of open forum of critical inquiry and things like that. None of that will work. My status has been degraded, or people are trying to anyway, and in a large portion of the field, it has been because that portion is woke.
Yeah.
So I have to go outside of the field. I mean, they forced my hand. And it's interesting because they don't seem to realize what they're doing. I just want to talk, but if they won't let me talk, then I have to scorch the earth. I mean, it's just they don't really see.
Well, what do you mean by scorch the earth?
Just
Are we going to
expose,
defund the Rhetters?
Show people exactly what's going on here, and show people that you're paying tuition so that these morons can teach your kids to not communicate.
Okay.
Right.
So let's expound on that then.
Okay.
So speaking to the parents, what are they signing up for? What are they paying into? What's going to come out the other side? What is their kid going to end up talking to them, not just about, but how they talk about whatever they talk about at the turkey dinner, right? When they come home from Thanksgiving, how is their kid going to start critiquing or interacting with them?
Well, what they're supposed to do, what they're ideally supposed to do, is come home and talk about how they realize that different audiences have different versions of credibility, different emphases on different values, different values, attitudes, and beliefs in general, right? And the key to communication is to gauge each different one as best as you can and speak accordingly, right? And you can do this with various what are called tropes and schemes. You can rearrange the order of words to have more impact, right? You can use figurative language, right? And you can understand the power of emotion as well as logic, as well as your own credibility as a speaker or writer. That's what you're supposed to get out of this. And you're supposed to learn the common dialects and modes of speaking and communicating for most civic and professional contexts, right? And we're supposed to give you that knowledge. That's what's supposed to happen. They're going to come home instead and say that what English that is deemed standard is oppressive because white people created it. All this is to perpetuate the status quo of white supremacy, right? And my writing class was really a sociology class on race. That's what they're going to say instead.
So basically, this is what people are critiquing about CRT. CRT just completely consumes every other discipline, or
critical social justice.
Yeah,
which is a manifestation of CRT that isn't quite fair to CRT originally. There are things in CRT originally that I don't like. It's definitely an illiberal way of going about things. It has no trust for classical liberal values, right? But critical social justice just takes that, puts it on steroids, and pretty much paints people as either oppressor or oppressed.
Yeah.
In line, you've talked to Lindsay enough, in line with proletariat bourgeoisie, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me. So yes, that's what's going on here. And what I argue in the book, and I part of this book is written by a colleague of mine from University of Arizona. What we try to do in this book is say that, these critical social justice tactics are actually disempowering, and they're being embraced because of a lack of empowerment and an overemphasis on a need to acquire dignity, right?
As opposed to credibility, or what?
As opposed to everything else. Okay. This is about dignity. This is about you recognizing how great Black people are. Damn it.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what this really is about. And I'm arguing that, this want of dignity is getting in the way of what we're actually supposed to be doing, and it's getting in the way of actual empowerment, right? So I talk about how we don't really emphasize self-awareness, emotional self-control, right? We're not cognizant or mindful of the way we're talking to ourselves, and how we may be abiding by a false narrative, or being too negatively emotional and things like that. And then I move into what I talked about before, gauging your audience to the best of your ability without bringing your own baggage, meeting them where they are seriously. And after that, I talk about how to put all those things together to actually work with others, whether they're in your tribe or not, to better society, right? Okay. So how do we collaborate? So I don't just complain about DEI initiatives. I try to present an alternative, right? Do this instead is what the book is about. Yeah. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Oh, well, when will it be available for?
It's available right now. It's extremely expensive.
Yeah, like $95. You guys, you academics. No wonder you guys are tanking. Like no rational person can spend money on this.
Yeah. That's not my call, by the way.
I know. You're just part of the system. You're just doing your job.
I will be giving a talk on the book in Philadelphia and Denver later on this year. And if you end up at those places, the book is heavily discounted.
Okay, there we go.
Right. So there's that's one way to get it. Or you can also get desk copies if you're a professor. So that's another way to do it. You can ask your library to get it. There are ways around the $95.
Yeah. This concept of dignity and Black is beautifulism, which
well, it is.
It is, but it's a rhetorical reality.
Yeah.
And that is standing in place of actual, what? What is that again?
Actual empowerment, actual progress.
Yeah, what would actual empowerment be like? Rather than peppering the place with all these slogans, because I see this a lot in teacher training. They're taught to, say all these slogans and stuff. That's not actually empowering that community. So what is the proper way to empower that community? And of course it is building up their self-esteem, but it doesn't end there.
No, it doesn't end there at all.
Yeah.
I would say building up what's called positive self-regard.
Okay.
Which
How is that
looking
different than, just being proud of your lineage or whatever?
Well, positive self-regard is looking at yourself and saying, here's what's good about me as an individual. Here's here's what I can work on and things like that. And here's how I can possibly influence my environment. And those things that I'm not that great on, I can figure out ways to improve upon. What the book tries to drive home, again, like chapter 2 in the previous book, I'm embracing empowerment theory, which has 3 components, right? The interpersonal, dealing with ourselves, self-awareness, self-management, right? Intrinsic sense of dignity, right?
In everyone.
Yes.
We're all God's creatures kind of thing.
Well, I mean, that, sure. I mean, everybody has their version of what's called a secure base. Somebody's might be their skill in this or that. Somebody else's might be this philosopher they love who pulled them out of depression or something like that. Everybody's got a different kind of situation. Yeah. The ideal is to have an intrinsic secure base, which is why I had my students read Epictetus last week. Somebody who's like, I don't care if they're complimenting you. That's outside of yourself. Don't care about it.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And then there's the, interactional, which is how do we, once we have that security, we can talk to other people without projecting our ideas onto them, without bringing our baggage from another situation here, right? We're better able to do that. And ultimately, we're better able to collaborate on what are called superordinate goals, which is one goal that several different groups can have at the same time. The
like
ultimate
social justice, right?
Well, sure. I mean, if you're doing it right. The ultimate superordinate goal is if there was an alien invasion, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I will be fighting alongside neo-Nazis to get rid of these aliens.
Yeah.
Right? That's the ultimate superordinate goal. So to recognize some of those things and think about them and talk about them and collaborate to reach those goals is also a part of empowerment and what I'm trying to say here. The thing about this book is that it's not just a replacement for current woke diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. It's good, period. I mean, it's DEI or diversity or social justice is a subcategory of this empowerment I'm talking about. It's not, synonymous with it, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to do with this, and I hope people read it regardless of the price.
I was thinking, sorry to go here, but you were saying the ultimate superordinate goal being an alien invasion, and, a running question about, the culture war or the West is that there's so much infighting because we don't have an external locus of hate, or we don't have an external enemy to take all of our, stress away from each other. And
there's no Darth Vader.
Yeah, there's no Darth Vader. Can't there be? I'm sorry to go here, but I just think, does it have to be a bad guy? Can't the superordinate goal be God or like the ultimate good? Can there not be, or is there? It's just not in our programming to have something that unites us that's actually positive, that's not againstness.
If tribalism is in our DNA, I guess I'm trying to, change us at a cellular level. Yeah. And do our best to look at that. Jonathan Haidt does the whole moral foundations theory thing, right? We all have the same positive values. We just emphasize some more than others. Mm-hmm. So it's not I'm right, you're wrong. It's I'm right and you're a different kind of right. And let's talk about this and figure out what we can do.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what I'm trying to do. So what is that superordinate goal?
Yeah.
It's stability. The
curiosity.
Social empowerment.
Yeah. Celebration.
Yeah.
For its own sake. Yeah. I mean, it's the positive vision of multiculturalism. It's the positive vision of a certain amount of moral relativism that got lost in the shuffle, I think. The ability for a pluralism of different communities and different value sets to figure out by means of communication
right,
where they are together, where they actually are unified in some way, or at least able to exchange value on a human level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said.
Thank you. That's always a great compliment coming from you. It does seem like the instance of your field and the instance of Evergreen, they're case studies, they're opportunities to rise above. And you say, even though that polemic or your book is criticizing to a certain extent CRT, DEI, the problems with this empowerment thing, with this version of empowerment, you're trying to bring something better to the table, something that is probably why you are in love with the Greeks or the classics, is because there is a virtue and a value that we can grow our spine upon, or that is a continuation of something that's much greater than this particular moment and our particular strifes, right?
Yes. Socrates went as far as to say, in order to be an effective communicator, you have to see into the soul of the other person and shape your words, based on that soul. He said that love is, real love, divine love is looking at somebody and being reminded of heaven. Right.
Yeah.
And you gauge your or you cater your words to the soul of that person, right? I mean, he's being lofty here just to drive home the importance of rhetoric and how to think about it properly in his sense, right? But I always like that idea, because what you're doing is you're trying to understand to the best of your ability this other person, although he's being mystical in his explanation. He's really talking about effective and cognitive empathy, right? I'm going to do my best to understand why you feel the way you do and understand why you think the way you do, right? And ideally, as Wayne Booth said with his listening rhetoric, you'll do the same for me, right? And that's the ideal here, and we can move from there. But as the book drives home towards the end, it's not enough just to do that. Once we do that, we have to figure out ways to work together to improve our lives materially as well as emotionally and psychologically.
Yeah, that's something that I'm hearing a lot in your description of all these ideas, is that there's a psychological component. There's a very heavy emphasis on health, starting with the self and then going through layers to the other and then the community. So there's this, I guess, like a North Star running through the entire thing. But, okay, square that with going scorched earth. How do you see the soul in your enemy? How do you see the soul in that person who you need to ridicule at this point? Or how do you still maintain that, there's got to be some awesome Greek word about that.
I'm not entirely sure what you're saying yet, so I can't really.
The act of speaking to the soul of somebody who you've decided to go scorched earth against. Are you still speaking to the soul, or how do you not lose the ability to see their soul when
Innocuous. What you're doing is Innocuous. What you're doing.
I knew there was a Greek word. That's a Greek word, or is it a new web platform?
It's Socrates.
Okay.
It's Socrates. I mean, you don't just ridicule and walk away. You ridicule and say, what's your response to that? You get to talk.
Okay.
You're seeing in that other person's soul at this point by saying, okay, I want you now to, talk to me in that way. But here's the thing. You don't just insult. You insult. You don't just ridicule. You ridicule and explain the ridicule. Explain your justification for the ridicule. Okay. And this is not a first resort. It's a last resort. All right. I've gotten to this place in my field where this has to be the way to go. So as long as it's a conversation, right, then it's fine. I don't care if you ridicule me, as long as I get to respond. That's all I ask. Let's have a conversation. Insult me every statement, as long as we have the conversation.
Okay.
Right?
I'm hearing, I guess it goes back to what you were saying about listening. Like, you're always providing the opportunity for somebody else to respond. You're not closing down the conversation. You're not shutting down the conversation. You always have that space of listening. And maybe that is where that, an idea of that listening, or an idea of always allowing somebody else to have more to say and to change their views or to clarify their views, that there's got to be something about that. Like, I feel like that attitude, or allowing that to happen, is a core of maybe liberalism, or core value in how we approach society, or even ourselves, to say, I always have more. There's more to me than I know. There's more that can be said, and always allowing that, even when you're in, when you're hating yourself, or when you're embroiled in a very contentious exchange. It just seemed like there's almost something divine about that. Like that is the open, just allowing that to be.
Yes, and Socrates said the same thing. There's something divine about that.
Okay.
About doing your best to understand the other person, and having that start a divine conversation. That's kind of what he was getting at. Classical liberal values, if you do them right, they are social justice, right? It's ultimately, it's a primacy of reason, but also a deliberative democracy. I say my piece, you respond, I respond to you, you respond, and things like that, and we eventually get somewhere, right? That's what's supposed to be happening.
Or session ends, everybody goes home, and the policy was never made, and the government's in debt for another 2 weeks and has to shut down if the deliberations never change. There's a translation from deliberation to actually action.
Right.
What is that? How do we know, or do we establish ground rules for, we're going to make a decision?
Well, in chapter 4, okay. In chapter 4, I talk about collaboration and how once we do the interpersonal and interactional, now we have to spin this into working together. And the thing about empowerment theory, all right, and this goes back to Mark Zimmerman. He wasn't the person who, invented it, quote unquote, but he's kind of the primary figure in my research anyway. He and others say you have to have all three to be empowered. You don't just understand yourself and then understand how to interact with others. You have to understand yourself, understand how to interact with others, and understand how to collaborate with others to improve your lives, right? You need all three of them to be empowered. If you're missing one, you're not truly empowered.
Okay, yeah.
So the collaboration is imperative.
Okay.
And that is the ultimate goal.
So aside from the alien invasion, which would allow you to align with Nazis, there's still the goal that's much broader, even though you probably would want to leave the Nazis out of this, is collective improvement of our lives together. And maybe that would initiate, in the case of neo-Nazis, a discourse that would eventually revolve in an alignment of goals, and then the disalignment of racism, or things that would get in the way of improving everybody else. So even racism can be solved in this usefulness, or this improvement oriented praxis.
Well, in the book's conclusion, I say that empowerment theory it aligns perfectly with classical liberal values, right? And if you take a look at classical liberal values, free speech, the primacy of reason, free expression, things like that, individuality, right, which is something I talk about throughout the book. If you look at that, then classical liberal values are empowerment, right? Empowerment is classically liberal, right? So they're kind of working together there. And if you abide by classical liberal values and this kind of empowerment, then the kind of hate that spews from a neo-Nazi no longer makes sense. Well, it doesn't make sense. It never made sense to me in the first place, but you know what I mean. But
it's exposed, it's ridiculed by the process.
Yes.
Yeah. So something like solving racism, which I think is probably an error, in a certain respect, it kind of went off the rails at some point in the civil rights process, like we can end racism, or we have to tackle and we have to end racism right now, and then we get into what is racism? Well, everything's racist, or it becomes a bait and switch into, no, we need to control everything because we're solving racism, but we're doing something else. There's some sort of swapping out of why we're doing this thing that we're doing, which is ending racism. In this classical liberal empowerment approach, does racism itself not need to be ended so much as it just naturally is ran out of the system? Like it's somehow debugged in a way, and we don't attack it direct. It just kind of becomes something that goes away. Is that the hope? Yeah. Is that naive?
Ending racism is the wrong goal. If you do this empowerment, that'll take care of itself. Okay. An empowered person doesn't discriminate based on skin color or ethnicity. It's nonsensical.
Why is it nonsensical? Why does racism not work in an empowerment philosophy?
Because racism is projecting an ideal or an idea onto somebody before you even meet them. Okay. And what interactional empowerment is, and all this is rhetorical, right? What interactional empowerment is looking at that person, saying, okay, I do have my memories, right? I do have my experiences and things like that, but they need not run the show. What's going to run the show is what happens here and now, right? The operational definitions we come up with, the understanding we have of each other and things like that. That's going to do it. That's empowerment. To do anything else isn't empowerment. Okay. And racism is doing something else than that, right? Okay.
So racism would be reading into the room rather than reading the room. The process of active listening and of being not always, but first and foremost open to, there's this divine prompt or whatever. There's this openness to experience. There's this possibility in the other person. And my job first and foremost is not to project, but to evoke who they are, so then I can then figure out how to have credibility, how to engage with them, how to attenuate my language and my posture and all that stuff in order to communicate with them.
And perhaps even be transparent about all that. Say, hey, I'm trying to figure out, what you value, right? And how it may or may not overlap with the things I value. It probably will, right? And we can go from there, That's what ideally would happen. And I think if we could do those things, if we can be fully empowered, kinds of discrimination like the one we're talking about right now would dissipate.
So shoehorning a current event in there, in time of war, in time of imminent threat, not just aliens, but Russians, even worse than aliens to some people, the speed at which, the temperature of the room changes, specifically within social media, the speed at which values are adopted, narratives are adopted, is rapid increase. It snaps so hard down. The Ukraine situation snapped so hard down on social media that COVID itself was basically forgotten, right? And all these other problems were basically forgotten. We were unified in considering this one very complex situation. In that kind of climate, how do we listen appropriately? How do we manage that environment? What are the steps? How would empowerment help us in times of crisis? Right.
Are you asking me how can empowerment solve the Ukraine situation?
No, not solve the Ukraine situation, but help us all to collectively contribute or at least engage in the conversation about that. And it can be swapped out with any other crisis. But it's just very salient because Ukraine has nuclear weapons somewhere in it.
Yeah. And you mentioned something about narrative and how we embrace narratives quickly and things like that. Yeah. What the interpersonal aspect of empowerment does is it makes us be mindful of what we're doing and why we're doing it. A lot of times we'll embrace a social reality or a narrative because it caters to our hopes and dreams, or it explains something that's been a mystery to us for so long, and that relief of having an answer is, seductive, right? acknowledging that. I talk in the chapter. I literally say, like, this is using rhetoric on yourself. Why are you doing this? What are you getting out of it? What are the other possibilities? Right?
Yeah.
Being quite mindful of what's going on. And again, this is why I had my students read Epictetus and other aspects of Stoicism last week. Because Epictetus is like, be cognizant. Don't get seduced. I mean, even if somebody praises you,
Mm-hmm.
you say thanks and move on. Don't embrace that, because that same person can hate you tomorrow, and then you're gonna feel like crap.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know?
or you end up in YouTube space. You end up submitting to a fanarchy. Like you end up catering to the crowd. You end up being audience captured, right? So you need to maintain sovereignty, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe it's the first step towards an answer. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just thinking about because we use rhetoric every day in our life, especially if we're online. And if you're online, you're watching YouTube. This is everybody on YouTube is engaging in rhetoric. Everybody. It's unless you're walking around Bangladesh with a camera strapped to your head, most of this talking content is based out of rhetoric. All of Twitter, all of Facebook, all of the social media, our online lives are constructed out of rhetoric, out of how we behave rhetorically. And so I think that rhetoric itself is an absolutely essential art. It should be taught start talking about it or planting the seeds of it, just like SEL in kindergarten. It should be the backbone of our education. And whether or not it is, no matter what, so it should be explicitly and consciously made so. And so I think that that's why your field is. It's an absolute shame that for whatever reason it's been captured by something that's not practicing the core values, at least as you've explained them to me.
Yes. Everything you said is an accurate description of what's going on or not going on in my field. The good news is that, I have incoming first-year students who have had rhetoric in high school.
Okay.
Right? That's happening more.
Okay.
So that's a good thing.
Okay.
Right. But you're right. I mean, the farther, not down, I guess, the earlier we can do this, the better. We need not use fancy Greek or Latin terms.
I kind of
right?
like them, but that's just me.
I like them too. But we can instill in students or let students know that in order to, speak to somebody, you have to get to know who they are.
Yeah.
Period.
So, plug your stuff. I guess you got 2 books, but are you not working on with other people that do you have any other media projects or like weird collectives, councils? Do you have a Facebook group?
I am the moderator for Heterodox Rhetoric and Composition from Heterodox Academy. So that is a Facebook group.
What is that? It's just a Facebook group. So
yeah, well, it's Heterodox Academy has various different subgroups based on academic disciplines. There's economics, there's psychology, there's rhetoric, and I'm the moderator for that. So that's one little, relatively little thing I do. The big thing I do is Free Black Thought. I'm a co-founder of that organization, and the whole point of that organization is
spicy tweets.
Among other things, yes. Spicy tweets insofar as they drive home viewpoint diversity, within the Black intelligentsia. There's this idea perpetuated by media, perpetuated by critical social justice scholars and activists that we all think alike. And we feel
Biden would never say that, though.
Oh, no, he would never say that. Jesus. Yeah, and he was convinced when he said that Black people were standing up and cheering. Like, he was convinced.
So bad.
Yeah. That guy.
Okay. Anyway, so you guys are not doing that. You're exposing or exposing the rich tapestry and the frictions and it's not one smooth thing. There's texture to it, to all these different conversations, all these different individuals that have contributed to all these different fields through all this different amount of time.
Right, right. And we do that in two ways. We have a compendium, a list of these various eclectic minds, right? Whether they're artists or journalists or philosophers or economists or what have you. All these different takes on things that go against the mainstream idea of what a black person would think about something. Right. And then we have the Journal of Free Black Thought. People can submit essays. We go over it. We work with them, if it needs some editing and things like that. And we publish these essays in the online journal we have. So that's where we are right now. Hopefully this can grow by leaps and bounds, and we can do all kinds of different things. I mean, I would like to see a hard copy journal, along with perhaps even a peer-reviewed journal, because, when it comes to being a black person who isn't spouting wokeness, it's a lonely place to be, right? It's a lonely place. I realized that in graduate school. I was like, oh, I'm a black person who doesn't want to do black studies, so nobody really cares about me.
Wow.
I realized that then, and that just kept going. So to give them a space, right? I would like to do that too. I would like to sponsor certain events, conferences, things like that. Maybe workshops for high school and college students on viewpoint diversity and how to talk across differences and things like that. We have a lot of goals. Right. And some of them at this point sound like pipe dreams, but I'm confident that with time and effort, we can pull a lot of these off.
And what is the main theme of the essays? It could be anything. What is it about?
Well, it could be ultimately it's here's a take you probably weren't thinking about, regarding people of color and what they think about X. Right.
Yeah.
So. Or here's a black person's take on the whole lived experience thing, that is probably not the same as you've been hearing, right? Things like that.
I really think that you guys should have a podcast. You should have a forum. You should interview people.
That's one of the first things we wanted to do. But here's the thing, I'm busy, man. I have papers to grade. I can't do a podcast every week. I mean, I got to figure that out, I guess. I mean, I guess I can figure out how to not sleep, somehow.
Well,
I'm insane.
See, you took 1 hour and 15 minutes out of your week to speak with me. That's all.
True.
You made time for me. You can just, we can talk about it off camera or at some point if you just want tips and pointers. It's really easy. You just find somebody who's interesting and you listen to them. You practice rhetoric for an hour and then you ask them something fancy about themselves and have them plug their work, and then you're done. You post it.
All right. Maybe I will pick your brain.
Well, because I think that the world's changing. We're going back to an oral society. I think there's a lot of power that's been unlocked by technology. So just... why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you?
Explore.
Right.
Erec Smith, always a pleasure. Third time on, I think.
Yeah.
Just solo. Have we had with a third party?
No.
Yet? Okay. Well, maybe next time.
That'll be fun.
Have time. Yeah. So thank you very much.
You are welcome very much.